Guys,
Hey,
how you doing?
Welcome.
Got a special guest today. Ken, do you want to introduce your guest? I can read a little bit of his bio if you want.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the topic of selling more. Everyone wants more high quality leads. Everyone wants more sales. That is a problem that I would say everyone thinks everyone else has figured out, and in my experience, no one really has figured out. And it's a constant pursuit. And so everyone looks for the silver bullet, and we don't have one, and I don't think there is one. However, our guest today is a coach for helping agencies sell better. And so he works with agencies and other types of businesses, but specifically agencies, and helping them sell more, close more, and so that's the topic we're talking about today. So I don't have his bio in front of me. You do.
I do. Mr. Dominic Cummins. Did I say that correctly, Dominic?
You absolutely did, yep.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. Your bio is that you spent over 15 years in corporate America, managing sales and marketing teams around the world. After helping a small software company achieve a $500 million exit, you took the opportunity to start your own agencies. And now you specialize in bridging the gap often between sales and marketing for companies between 50 and 100 million in revenue. That progressed nicely for a few years. And then when you realize that those within the marketing community, the agencies themselves, i.e. us, that we could use some similar help and training. So you have a passion for marketers as they help support you in a very successful sales career. So in October, you partnered with another agency owner to form the Apex Path, a mastermind for agency owners to help them find and fulfill their purpose through a profitable agency. So Dominic, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. You're calling in from New York City, it looks like.
Or Toronto, so a little bit north of there, I suppose. Yeah, so calling in from Toronto today. But normally home base is in Los Angeles. New York.
Yeah.
All right.
Not a problem. So thank you so much for calling in and taking the time. We're excited to hear about this. You know, I think it was one of the first or second episodes we talked about how do you generate sales and
leads and marketing.
I don't know that we offered any
close. I like the idea of closing.
Well, it's a constant discussion. I don't know if there's ever a conclusion on that one.
Yeah. So Dominic, just give us a brief background. Obviously, we read your bio, but tell us about your career path, kind of at a high level.
Yeah, so at a high level, I started out in sales, and I actually started out primarily in financial sales. I got my brokerage licenses when I was really young. I was 19 when I got my Series 7 brokerage license, so it was kind of an early start. Pretty quickly realized I liked sales quite a bit, seemed to be pretty decent at it, and then went into leadership at also a pretty young age. By the time I was like 23, 24 years old, I was running an entire branch for a bank and leading teams, and that was the first realization that just because you can sell doesn't mean you can lead. So that was an eye-opening experience. But then over that time period, just for the next few years, as kind of the bio said, just really spent a lot of time in sales leadership. I've had the opportunity to lead all over the world, so it's really cool to sell in different countries and different personalities and all that kind of stuff. It really factors into sales, but it turns out at the end of the day, we're all humans. So humans, no matter whether they're in South America or Europe or Africa, it doesn't really matter. It seems that people still have the same things going on in their life, and they want solutions, and people do actually like to buy, but they just don't like that feeling of being sold to. And so that's been kind of one of those things of been my when it comes to leadership, that's just been my guiding principle is like, hey, just let's never forget that we're selling to human beings, treat them like human beings, and that seems to work out very, very well in most cases.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What kind of things are you seeing? I know that you had your own agency or still do, but what do you feel like is the trend and or the thing that agency owners or salespeople within agencies get wrong, and that you help them kind of adjust when you do consult with them, work with them?
I think it's this ongoing constant seeking of more leads as being the solution rather than closing more sales. So I'll give an example. A few months ago, there's a pretty large marketing community out there, and I saw a survey that got run around of like, what's your biggest concerns for 2020? So obviously it was at the beginning of this year. And resounding by just a huge factor, the number one thing that was affecting agencies was they didn't have enough leads. Now, obviously, there's some irony to that statement that a marketing agency struggles to get leads, given that one would think that's what we as marketers do, right, is get leads. But ignoring that irony is the fact that that's just the focus. Like, well, I need more leads. I have to get more leads. When the average industry closing percentage, and this was a stat I found early last year from HubSpot, and Salesforce has a similar stat, and it's been backed up in some other sources as well, is that the average agency closes qualified opportunities into sales at the rate of 11%. And so to put that, in the sales world, we call that the closing percentage. If you look at any other industry, so across all industries, the average is around 24-25%. So it's less than half. Used car salesmen convert at a higher clip than agencies. They close at 14 or 15% on conversion of qualified opportunities into sales. So the thing that I see agencies focus on, if you look at that story and think, well, I just need more leads. Well, you're filling in something. It's basically like you're filling a leaky bucket. We hear that expression a lot, right? But it really is that case, is that you're just putting stuff in there. Actually, if you just took what you already did and improved that 11% number, you could have significant results inside of your agency. And the thing is leads are expensive. We as marketers know that it's not getting any cheaper to generate more leads these days. It's not getting any easier. Google has and will continue to change their algorithm. Facebook has done the same thing. Getting leads isn't easy. But to be able to just close one more deal for every 10 people that you meet with could theoretically, depending on the size of your agency and where you're at, double the size of your agency if you're a smaller agency. So to me, the focus, to answer your question, is that we just focus too much on leads and not enough about the actual conversion of turning that into a sale.
So that's interesting. I mean, I've heard this before, and I agree with it, but it still doesn't change the fact, right? Why? So can we dig in for a second, Dominic? Why do you think people focus on leads? Like, why is that the number one thing that everyone thinks they need more of?
I think it's a comfort level. And it's that as marketers, again, our job is to create leads. That's what we do for our customers. Obviously, we certainly take it further, especially if you're in an e-commerce world, is you actually want to create sales. But our goal is to generate interest, right? We create awareness that our products and services exist. We get people engaged, whatever customer value journey you follow. We've got that progression that goes through there. And so I think my belief is that, and what I see with agencies is they just default to their level of comfort. I know how to go out there. I'll run another Facebook ad campaign, which will generate more leads to the top of my funnel. And then eventually, by just default, I'll get more sales out of that, because the more I put in the top, the more I'll get out the bottom. And there's some truth to that. But again, I'll go back to the cost is the problem. But I think it's just purely comes down to that's what they're comfortable with.
It's also easier, right? It's easier to focus on like getting that, going on the hunt and getting that lead versus, doing the hard work of the sales process.
I find that maybe it's because a lot of the lead funnels are, once you set them up, they're automatic. So it allows you as a business owner or somebody that's involved in sales to create some automatic leads where you can go and do something else for your business while this thing's self-running, as far as developing, new leads from the internet again. But how many of those actually end up in the bottom of the funnel? That's the question, right? And that's the challenge. I know for us, most of our sales haven't come from just inbound leads coming from the internet. They've come from, people that we know, reputation, and other things. And I'd like to unpack that a little bit more too, of trying to understand, from the agencies that you look at, what's the percentage of the closing deals based on the way they came into the agency?
Yeah, great question. So we do this, and I want this will also address what you made an interesting statement there too, where it feels like it's easier, especially if you create some form of automation. And as the agencies get larger, I do see that being the case. Is that if you're say $1.5 million, $2 million agency, your lead flow is fairly on some form of autopilot, or you have a small team that's managing that. For the smaller agencies, less than $1 million, virtually none of their funnels are that automated. Sure, you can use a tool like ClickFunnels and it's got it kind of working, but I don't see I think there's a perception of it being far more automated and hands off than it really is. But to answer your question as far as the percentages, so I actually draw this chart out as part of our workshops. That's what I'm in Toronto doing. We're going to do a workshop this week. One of the things I draw out is that, yes, it's easy to create a funnel, but like things that are easy, typically the reward for those aren't as great. So if you look at the typical conversion of cold traffic to a sale, I run the numbers somewhere between 3 and 5%. I know that varies a little bit by industry, but if you're just completely cold traffic to ultimately ending up in a sale, somewhere between 3 and 5%. So if you set up a funnel to do that, that's kind of your rate of return. But it's easy to do it, to your point, is that it's not that difficult once you get the work done, and actually most marketers seem to enjoy that to some degree. The next level up that I draw to that, though, is actually this old thing that nobody really likes doing called telemarketing. And the industry averages for telemarketing are around 11 to 15%. So across all industries, not just marketing. Actually, I can't find a good number for marketing because I suspect actually there's not a lot of data to support anything from an agency. I don't see a lot of telemarketing going on in agencies, but yeah, if 11 to 15%. Now, obviously, if you look at the bottom, I know this isn't a visual podcast, but like if you draw out the bottom layer being the creating a funnel 3 to 5%, you come up on the hard scale and put telemarketing there and start converting at 11%. Well, yeah, it got significantly harder to do, but the reward is significantly greater. And then if you go up even one more level to things like referrals, things like any sort of face-to-face meeting, and those can be generated from any number of sources, but an actual face-to-face meeting with somebody, that closes at typically 30 to 40%, or if it's a referral, in my opinion, it should close much more like 70, 80% if it's a referral. You see that again, but that takes a lot of time to meet with somebody. You might have to jump on a plane to fly somewhere. You might have to take half the day to go. I'm from LA, so traffic is always a component. If you're going through all that, but then look at the closing. It's the reward. I won't say it's risk reward as much as it's the difficulty reward. And so you can create funnels to create more leads to ultimately create sales, but how much of that for, especially again, I'll say a smaller agency, less than $1 million, how much, what kind of war chest do you have to support 3 to 5% conversions to keep filling that funnel up with ad spend? That's the consideration. And then once you're automated and you've got a $2 million agency, different story. You can afford to take that cash flow tranche waiting for a lead to convert. That's fine. But again, depending on where your agency is, that may not be your ultimate goal. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know you in your bio, it says you work with kind of medium-sized agencies as well. So, so you just gave an example of like a small agency. How would you apply what you're talking about and what you do to say a $20 to $50 million agency?
I think the principles are still the same. What you just say, though, is that there has to, at that point, lead generation has to be a component. There's no question that you would need all three of those things there's got to be some level of funnel that's going on to capture those folks that if you can automate, if there's anything that they can do to create relatively automatic conversions that don't require a lot of human being intervention, because then you have a cost of acquisition question there, right? As the larger you get, if you're a $20 million agency, cost of acquisition is definitely top of mind, as is profitability. So you want to have as much of that going that you can that's just automated. But then you're definitely going to want a group that's in their telemarketing, and there's got to be some face-to-face where it's executive level. If you're a $20 million agency, chances are you're picking up big brands. And they're not going to just come to you in most cases through a funnel. I've closed very large deals in my life, but with major brands out there, And they like a little bit of personal one-to-one contact. They want somebody to hop on a plane and fly to their headquarters and take the tour of the factory floor. Or one of the coolest deals I ever got to work on, just an example of it, is I got to sell ESPN. And this was in the software world. I was running marketing and sales for the software company, but we got to go into ESPN. They loved nothing more than to walk us around their entire studio and show us every set and show us everything. Now, as a sports fan, I loved nothing more than to walk around every set as well. But that type of personal attention you need. But when you're talking, that's a $20 million deal for us, you got to spend that attention. So my point to answer your question is you got to have it all when you're a large agency. As the smaller agency, though, we use an expression that we term a lot is called, we stay close to the transaction. If you're a small agency, again, less than $1 million, maybe less than $1.5 million, depending on your profitability and such, you've got to stay close to the transaction, meaning like, what's your network? What's the referrals from your existing clients? Make sure that all is like really, really working well so that you can land clients at a low cost of acquisition. As you get larger and larger, you just stack on the additional pieces, lead flow, telemarketing, those pieces on there just to make sure that you capture every angle.
Got it.
So that's that's really interesting. I still wonder why, I still been, as you've been talking, I'm sort of breaking down for me, there's sort of excitement that comes with generating leads. And I think that's something that you guys mentioned it, but I think that's something that drives it. It's sort of, again, what we go to and what's easy. And I would guess we talk a lot about, it turns out a lot of agency owners ended up in the seat of being an agency owner. And when that's the case and you are the tactician and you're the expert and maybe not the natural salesperson, you would naturally go towards, your expertise. And that probably that's probably holds true even as you go up the ladder. I know we worked with a lot of global agencies and they have sort of some of their own sales team. But outside of having a dedicated sales staff, you still have, if you're a tactician, like you're going to go to what you know. Yeah. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, there's some, we create a lot of funnels and develop a lot of leads online for our clients. And I know for us, we've done a lead generation, and there is something fun about, putting some shekels into Facebook and Instagram or LinkedIn, right? Some shekels into LinkedIn and see leads being driven, specific type of leads being driven to your website.
What did I catch? It's like at the end of my line.
Yeah, it's kind of like
X shekels into LinkedIn.
Exactly. It's kind of like, putting shekels in a slot machine and pulling the trigger and a few coins come out and you're like, "Ooh, cool. I got a few leads, driving to my site and hopefully they're qualified at some level and all that stuff." But the reality is that, from my experience, I haven't seen a lot of those leads turn into sales,
or high quality sales.
Or high quality sales.
That's
I think so. For me, like if I can ask you, Dominic, a question, what should a company that is, let's say you're starting an agency and you're $1 million in revenue versus another company that is maybe $10 million in revenue, how much percentage of your total revenue should go into the efforts of sales, like percentage?
As far as overall cost of acquisition, like how much revenue do you spend to acquire a customer?
Yeah. Like what is...
So I typically... Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So where I learned this principle from when I was at the software company, and before we came on air, I was talking about how I'm not so much into the scale to sell kind of world as much anymore. I did the venture capital thing for a while. And that is a challenging world, but I did learn a few things along the way. And one of the things that for a company to be considered healthy for a venture capital acquisition, our cost of acquisition had to be between 18 and 22%. Interestingly enough, it did not necessarily benefit you to be lower than that. So I remember that was an early mistake I made, was like, cool, we're acquiring customers for like 12 to 15%. And they were like, great, spend more money. So they really like to have it in that 18 to 20%. So as a just sort of I just split right down the middle and just say 20% of acquisition cost is a good number. Now you have to factor in some things in there of like your sales rep salaries would then start to be in there if you're a larger agency. tech stack to support the sales team. There's a few things that are in there, so you can start to see like where that could quickly add up if you're a large enough business. But to simply answer your question, I've always, since I got taught that a few years back in a harsh manner, I've decided to stick with that 18 to 22% being a really good number for that. So it probably answers a little bit of that question too, is that's also would factor in your lead costs. So how many shekels, great word usage, by the way, how many shekels are you throwing at LinkedIn? That's in there. If your sales rep has to then take said person out to dinner for, wine and dine them because they have to, this is a very large deal, that's in your cost of acquisition as well. And so you really start to see where there is a finite amount of money, but there is money that can be spent to acquire a customer.
Yeah, we used to spend a lot of money pitching new clients in my olden days in agency world. We would look at acquiring a customer that may spend, a couple $1 million a year with us, and we would easily spend $50,000 just putting together the pitch and the presentation, as far as the cost of employee time and other travel time and things of that nature, maybe even more. And it was always, I always looked at that and looked at the numbers and would say, okay, where is the point where, like, how much more are we going to throw into acquiring a customer? And it really depends on, and even trying to understand what the customer's value is over 1 year, 2 year, and understanding that we're not probably going to keep this customer forever. There's probably, a 3-year lifespan that we can account, a 3-year contract that we can account that we're going to keep this customer even if we get them. So you have to weigh that.
You bring up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you bring up a really great point, if you don't mind me interrupting on that one, because here's the piece. Now, as you get larger as an agency, and there's a broad spectrum in this audience, it sounds like it's, if you're a $20 million agency, you've got cash flow, you've got things going on, you've got an account, you can spend $50,000 to acquire a customer. I've spent at least that at times to acquire a very, very large customer. And that happens at times by the time you fly your entire team out to see them, and hotels and flights and dinners and all that good stuff. But if the important piece to remember is that I'll see agencies, and I apologize for bringing it back down a little bit, but if you're sitting at your $1 million to $2 million agency, you likely don't have that. And what we'll send, you don't have that war chest to spend on that. And where we see a huge mistake made is people go, oh, well, this client is worth $200,000 to me. That's true. They're worth $200,000 to you if they stay with you the entire year or 2 years. The only number that you really care about as a smaller agency right away, and I'd argue even the larger agencies should care about it as well, is the cash collected number. So let's say if I spend $50,000 to acquire this customer, but the first project they do with us is only $20,000 or is, or is only $50,000, then really we haven't made any money on that customer. Yes, there could be worth a certain amount of money, but they're not worth that money today. And so like when we do a workshop, for instance, I'll consider the workshop to be a success or failure, even though, and again, these are small numbers, but let's say we spend $2,000, $3,000 to do a workshop. If we don't convert a couple of people into that, never mind their lifetime value, then I don't consider it to be a success because the cash collected didn't offset the cost of the event, right? And if we think in terms of, and this goes back to what you said, the cost of acquisition for a customer could be 20%, but be careful though that your cash collected right up front isn't burying you, because if it costs you $20,000 to acquire a customer, but you only cash collect 5, and the $20,000 to acquire the next, you cash collect 10, you're pretty soon, I should have done that math in my head quicker. You spent $40,000 and only acquired 15 back.
You're broke.
Yeah, especially if you don't know.
Exactly.
If you don't have, and then there's cost inside of that, right? So not all that's profit, which is a big thing.
Right.
And if you don't know what your profit is on your profit margin on the services that you provide, then it makes it even harder.
I have another question regarding that question that we just talked about is, a lot of times you answer an RFP, right, as an agency, and you really don't know what the opportunity is for a client. You can kind of guess, you can kind of estimate, but you're not 100% sure until you actually start to commit to go down that RFP, to spend a lot of time and energy responding to it, getting your pitch ready, maybe even flying to the location before you even know what the total opportunity is for that customer. Can you talk about where you need to how you can kind of judge that and where you might need to back away from an RFP and say, you know what, this just isn't really going to be a good opportunity for us. It's too much of a risk.
Well, I've done a lot of RFP work, and in the software company that I was in prior, the one that you mentioned at the outset during my bio, that was almost entirely done through RFPs, that business. I'm not a huge fan of RFPs, to be honest with you, just because of that process, right? It's so difficult to understand what you're getting yourself into. You have to quote, you're getting usually, what's the expression? I can't think of it. It's like lowest and best or whatever. And you're going for who's at the bottom, basically, in most cases. What I would suggest, and this is a longer play on RFPs, and I realize I will apologize in advance. This may not exactly answer your question, but this is how I typically approach RFPs. I think as a smaller agency, if you're less than $1 million, I don't think you should play in the RFP world at all because there's just too much risk. That's probably a little too hard statement.
But
I would say that's true.
Be very cautious.
I mean, in my experience,
As you
get larger, then fine, you can take that risk. Because I've done it. I remember when we first started our agency, we got an opportunity to get into an RFP for a city contract that looked really cool. It was really in our wheelhouse. We spent 6 months putting the darn thing together. And it does impact your ability to do other stuff while you're putting that all together. So I would say stay out of that world altogether. As you're getting a little bit larger, though, this is where like the principles of that ABM, account-based marketing, really start to come in to work well for RFPs. Is if you know that you're in that type of world, you have procurement specialists, you have people that are out there that run these types of business, that put out the RFPs. And it's really good if you know you want to work with a city, local government, or a large company that only does their work through RFPs. Then I would suggest that you start looking at having a team that supports that and just that, and building relationships out there at conferences, trade shows. And I understand that doesn't help you with the RFP that just got issued, but I would argue that most RFPs, and I'd be curious if you guys have seen this as well, but my experience with RFPs is the RFPs are typically written with somebody in mind. So the goal is get yourself to be the person that it's written for. And the only way to do that is to actually work relationships, and this is a long play, but work relationships out in the world to just have in your world of whatever your niche, whatever you're looking at, have people working that. So as an example, I've mentioned ESPN before, ESPN came in through an RFP, but we got out ahead of that RFP. We knew that they were starting to look, we knew there was a contract coming up, that they were looking for some revisions. Because my sales reps knew that. They were out there talking to people. They'd met somebody at a trade show. So we started meeting with them, and when we knew they were getting ready to go to RFP, we flew to Bristol, Connecticut to go sit down with them and wine and dine them and walk through the thing. And then lo and behold, the RFP gets written with some of the things that we very specifically could offer. And so that took a year for us to build that relationship. So I apologize. I know it's hard. I run a podcast too, so I know how it is when somebody doesn't directly answer your question. But I think that's the thing. Some folks should stay out of it and then understand that it's a long-term play. Otherwise, in my opinion, RFPs become hope as your strategy. Like you submit to an RFP and you hope you get it, unless you're out in front of it with some form of account-based marketing or key account management or however you want to term that. To just be, because if the RFP is not written for you, then it was likely written for somebody else. And you're just one of the three bidders. That's not an absolute. I don't know if Ken's shaking his head.
No, I agree. I agree.
But
I will tell you. No, I would be curious to know what you guys think from the change. Like, has it changed over the last 50 years? because
What are you saying? Are we old or something?
Well, I think it really
absolutely not. But my specific experience is that, and again, I sort of am not. I come from with a slightly different perspective to these things, but it's basically gambling with a lot of money and a lot of time. Time even being more expensive than the money side of it. And when no one knows who you are, I mean, we all know, like, a lot of times it's hard to be honest with yourself. Like, especially if you're not like looking for RFPs, but if you get one, like someone reached out to you, you might be thinking, oh, like there's like a kind of a false sense of this might be for me type of thing. But the truth is, someone on their side could have been an intern, went around the internet looking for companies that fit this certain profile.
Yeah.
They send it to them, and then now, because they need to get a bunch of bids back.
What we do now, and I think this is my stance on RFPs, is I've done both. I've wasted a lot of time on RFPs, and I also done RFPs where we've been awarded them. But it's typically the RFPs that are given to us with a wink, wink. And they're like, hey, we've been forced to write this RFP. Our purchasing is making us write this RFP. But
Right.
just kind of a wink, wink. You guys are on the top list, right? And there are some other people that are going to participate as well. And so, most of those RFPs I would probably participate in, only because I have some type of relationship with the customer at that point. Even if they're not our customer, they're still telling us that you guys are really going to be in the running. But I think it's definitely a gamble. A smaller agency sometimes it's tough doing these RFPs. You don't even have enough teams to put together these RFPs in the way that they need to, be put together. Some of them are very lengthy, and they ask for a lot of intense information about your agency, financial information that's that's private information that you have to give up as well. And so it's always a struggle for me.
I would even say that. Well, I'd be curious to know if anyone listening has a different perspective, because I've never met anyone in the agency world that has thought RFPs is a good thing, or that it's enjoyable, or that it's a really I've never.
Well, they're not enjoyable, that's for sure.
Yeah. But even aside from that, you step out of that. Like, what other industry? I mean, maybe the software industry to a little extent, but like. What other industry does it that way? And I think the point that I'm making is it seems to set up the relationship dynamic really poorly if you just look at it from that perspective, which is often the perspective that I look at it from. It's like one party is going to invest a lot of time and effort into something and then present it before the royalty, and then in hopes of getting
Knighted
or a blessing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is one of the elements that create just imbalanced relationships. I don't know if you would agree with that, Dominic, but it's an odd way to start in a relationship where it's solely one-sided, and then everyone except for one person's work gets tossed aside, and it's a massive waste, in my opinion, too.
I would push back slightly. I see both sides of this, because if I'm a business owner and I want a bunch of work done, I need to shop that around and get the best price. You would do the same thing if you're getting a new roof on your house, right? You would put out a request for proposal, right?
For sure.
You would say, I'm checking, I want 3 or 4 quotes. You can come out and measure, send me exactly what you're going to do for me, and then I'll compare.
And we do that,
Right.
and we do that today.
Right.
And maybe I'm wrong. Tell me. There's a certain bar that the RFP process often goes over in
Yes.
the pitching,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is like beyond, hey, here's what I think it will cost to do what you think, in a reasonable amount, but it's to where you're spending 50 grand sending 5 people out there, whatever.
It's like 50 pages long.
What I find funny though is like it's like a $60,000 website, and there's and the employees are spending $60,000 just putting together the RFP on their side, just because of the intensity of it. I'm like, what?
Yes.
Dominic, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this internal discussion we're having.
Well, and
I think that it's some great points being thrown around. And I think where you look at, I love that roofing contractor example, but I do think it's an example of what goes on with RFPs. Also answers the other question of what industries. I think it was Ken that brought that up. What industries? You see RFPs a lot in the government space, right? The government sector. And so we did a rebranding project last year for a company that did nothing but government contracts, and they set up the things. They're like these anti-terrorism barriers that go up in front of naval bases, right? So these are real specific things. And so the RFP process really makes a lot of sense in that case, because it is a vetting of security clearances, different things, work that's been done before. What are you looking at? But they're really not concerned about whether or not the barriers look pretty. They just want to make sure they work. Will it stop a bomb-laden boat at full speed trying to race towards a battleship? I mean, that's essentially what these things were. So it's not about, was it look pretty, does pretty, whatever. And it was interesting working with those contractors. I was like, well, what's some of the things? And they're like, well, yeah, some of the things we do are really cool, is that, like, our parts all fit together. And they said, we know that sounds really weird, but like, if you're setting this thing up, you're in water while you're doing it, and the parts don't fit right together with some of these other vendors and stuff like that. So, but the government didn't really care about that. They wanted the minimum viable product for did it do its job for the least amount of price. I think with a roof, it comes into a similar situation. That, to use that example, is a roof is a roof is a roof to some degree. Does it leak? Does it look okay? So then I don't care about I just need, you're right, I would go to get some quotes for that. Where it's hard for agencies, though, and where I see a lot of these RFPs is coming from some sort of government agency or larger organization, and they're just like, yeah, website's a website, it's a website. And we're like, well, but it's not. And that's where it's so challenging to respond to RFPs, is it's not a roof.
Yeah, and I think, we talk about this. You can only be
I have
the
a roofer
cheapest.
friend who would disagree, by the way.
You can only be the cheapest, right? The best or the only. We talk about that a lot.
Right.
And so I think as an agency, thinking that they're just getting the cheapest offer, you can't, you're not hiring an agency because they're the cheapest. I've never heard anybody say, I'm looking for the cheapest agency I can find, right? They're looking for the best or the only, typically, at a reasonable price.
Highest value.
The highest value. What advice would you give to an agency owner starting out that doesn't have money to participate in, doesn't even have money to really fly around the country to do pitches all that much? What kind of advice? Where would you put the energy if you were them? Where would you put? Where would you put the energy?
Yeah, absolutely. So work your network. And even if you don't think you have a network, you have a network. You came from somewhere, you've worked with people, you've interacted with people. Stay close to those people and talk to them. This is this idea, and I love this question. I'm so glad you asked it, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about, actually. So is the fact that the best way to start out your business when you get going, or even actually it's a pretty good way to even just launch a new product, do all those types of things. And I'll actually share an example of this in a second, but is to just reach out to people. Before I knew this was a strategy, I remember when I wanted to start my agency, so I'd come out of that exit, I had some opportunities that what am I going to do now? Like, what's my options here? And I put together this idea for a company, and I was like, I wonder if anybody would buy this. So what I did was just called some of my friends that I'd known before that ran businesses, and I used this line. I was like, actually, the first guy I called, ironically, his name was Brad. I said, Brad, listen, you would be an ideal client for me. I'm not pitching you. I literally just would love to hear your opinion. This is what I'm thinking I want to put together. Can I take you to lunch, share what I'm trying to do here, and let me know whether, am I crazy? Does it make sense? Like, just tell me whether or not this is good or a bad thing, because you would be the ideal buyer. Yep, sure. Take him to lunch. Partway through the conversation, he's like, this is great. I like this. I would tweak this. I don't know if I would need that. Here's some other things to do. Great. How much? And I was like, well, that part I would say prepare for. I was not prepared for that question. So I was like, I don't know, $1,500 a month. He's like, great. Can you start Monday? Now I did update my billing later on. 3 months later, I renegotiated that contract. We billed him for $160,000 the next year. But that 1,500 was like enough to prove my model worked. And then I went to the next person, and same thing happened. That person I charged 2,500. And then the third person I charged like 12 grand, because I was like, well, let me just take a flyer and see if I can get 12 grand out of this. And they said yes. So start with people and just run it by them. It's interesting. I just stumbled across this the other day, and I don't have it in front of me, but you can look it up. It's the Robert Collier Do Me a Favor sales letter. And if you Google that, you'll find this letter. So Robert Collier, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him, was a author and wrote a lot of it, wrote books on sales copy. I get the sense he was sort of an accidental copywriter, but just was a guy who wrote really effective copy. So I found this letter, and what he basically said was, listen, we've been making these jackets for the last few years, and we think we have a new design, but before we spend a bunch of money, the letter opened up with, will you do me a favor? And then it said, before we go spend a bunch of money on merchandising and asking all these questions and doing all this stuff with it, we just wondered if you would take a look at the jacket, wear it for a couple of days, and if you like it, let me know, and then send me a check for $15 or $20 for this jacket. So then he goes, and here comes the favor, do this, and so he walks through it, which is basically the model that I mentioned just a minute ago. What's interesting is that letter was written in 1931, and he sold 20,000 units of those jackets. And that's a lot of money in 1931. Heck, that's a lot of money now, but that was a lot of money in 1931. And it shows that principle of just going to the people that you know and asking them a simple question, would you do me a favor? Let me pitch you on this idea. I'm not trying to pitch you, but I want to hear what your opinion is. The worst case scenario that's going to happen out of that is that somebody gives you some great feedback and goes, yeah, that's not really my thing. I would be more interested in this. Best case, they buy from you. We teach this a lot, and we work with a lot of small, like startup agencies, just more of kind of a pro bono coaching for small agencies. Our current record is somebody closed their first piece of business 20 minutes after getting off the phone with us, because she's just like, all right, I'll just pick up the phone and I know somebody I can call right now. And that person told her, you don't need to take me to lunch. Just tell me what you're doing. Told her over the phone, and the guy said, yeah, sure. Let me sign up right now. I will go for it. So she ended up signing 3 clients that day. Even my wife, when she went to relaunch her business, used this exact same thing. She works with attorneys, and we had a son 3 years ago. That's why she's relaunching her business. And first attorney she called, he was like, don't need that piece that you're offering, but this over here, could you do that for me? And she was like, yeah, I could do that as well. And he was like, great, can we start Monday? So it's just a really effective way. Go to people. People love to give you their opinion. People love to do favors. Work your network and just do it, but use that particular pattern to do it.
That's really good.
That's great. And it's so simple, and we're over here, spending time and effort going to lead funnel conferences and setting up Facebook. And meanwhile, Dominic's like, pick up the phone, call someone you know, and tell them what you're doing, ask them if they need it.
Yeah, the problem.
It works.
No, it works.
One of the...
Anytime you want to launch a new customer or launch a new product, like even for a big agency, why wouldn't you just go to your customer base and say, hey, listen, use the Robert Collier letter. You could practically just copy it, send an email blast out and say, hey, would you be willing to try this?
One of the things that I do is
opportunity.
I seem to avoid that human contact only because I'm kind of afraid of the rejection, right? Yeah. Where when you're developing these cold leads, there's really no rejection. But if you ask somebody to, hey, can we have lunch or coffee? I want to just throw a few things by you, knowing that eventually you're going to try to talk to them about maybe potentially being a customer, there is that sense of rejection. And you have to really just get to the point where you realize that there's going to be that rejection, maybe a high level of rejection, and that's okay. Maybe you take something from it, right? You, like what you said, Dominic, you learn from it and you refine.
Yeah, it's totally exactly what it is because you don't know who, like when somebody comes to I know this will sound like a double negative. When somebody comes to your landing page that does not opt in, you don't know who that was. Yeah, you might pixel them and retarget it, but that's not personal rejection. You're just looking at a number of who did actually opt in. You don't see that. Versus telemarketing, when somebody says no and hangs up on you, you know exactly who just said that to you. That was a human being who just talked to you. Otherwise, on a landing page, it's a number. But I'll reverse that a little bit is just treat in most cases, when you create in marketing, you create a landing page, you're not actually trying to sell something on that landing page. You're trying to get them to do the first thing, which is to opt in, and then move them down the progression. Start treating your telemarketing calls the same way. You're not trying to sell somebody on that first telemarketing call. Or in the example that I just used, that's a face-to-face meeting example. You really have to go in there that I'm not trying to sell you on something. I'm just trying to get you to opt in to the landing page. I know nobody could see my air quotes in the podcast, but you're just trying to get them to opt in to the landing page, which is in essence just opt in to like, hey, will you opt in to meeting with me for lunch? Will you opt into this is a good idea or not? You're just moving. It's the same terminology. Yes, now there's a human in front of you that could reject you. But I think we put so much pressure on ourselves that when we go to meet with somebody, our goal is to sell something. Well, no, your goal is really just to earn more of their time. And eventually,
Actually, that's good.
it'll turn into a sale.
Interesting reverse on that is if you, and some people preach about this, and I was sort of skeptical about it, but this just sort of comes about in certain scenarios. But if you go, in my experience, if you go to those things and you just give information, like try and help, at least in that conversation. So at least now it's not leaving them doing you a favor, but you're actually providing some value. That is a really strong passive sell as well, in my experience. And sometimes you'll have people saying, thanks so much wow. You're sort of displaying your expertise without talking about how awesome you are, without even intentionally trying to display that. And that's kind of a really interesting thing. I would say the number one thing that I wanted to put a point on in that little discussion right there was, if you're, I would expect a lot of people fear rejection in this world because they're not natural born extroverted salespeople, and that is probably keeping you from doing a lot of things. We talked about fear and its effects a few episodes ago, but if you just switch the mindset of like, hey, when I meet with someone, I'm not trying to sell them. I'm not trying to talk about my resume. I'm not trying to make them think I'm awesome. I'm just trying to gather information.
Well, like Dominic said, you're trying to
Yeah.
earn more of their time.
Right. Then you don't have to fear the rejection so badly. However, there's still rejection, and I'm curious to know if there are any tactics specifically that you can do to help increase your tolerance for rejection as a human being.
Oh, I don't think anybody likes rejection. However, I will say that it feels less like rejection when all you've done is offer to help. And so it is, if they choose not to take your help, that's not rejecting you. They've rejected help, which makes no sense to most people, right? So your point, to the statement that's going through my head is value in advance. You're just providing value in advance. The only way that you earn more time, earn the right to get more time, is to earn that by giving them something. Give them value, talk them through things, help them go, hey, actually, I think this would be a great idea for you. It could be like, Ken, you guys have video content that you put out a lot. You have a lot of really helpful blog information you guys do. I'm sure you gentlemen, Bob and Brad, you guys do too, but I see Ken's. Is you've got this helpful video content that's going out there, stuff that's helping people. They get to know you. It feels less and less like a transaction than a natural flow when you provide so much value in advance. And so I think for me, so here's the interesting thing. I'm introverted. Most of the best salespeople that I know are introverted. They just are like have a natural or this learned response to be extroverted in a sales situation. But the best ones that I know are all introverts. Like, I don't talk to anybody when I'm here at the hotel. Like last night, I sat as far away from everybody as I could and read my iPad while I ate dinner here at the hotel. I'm not extroverted. But I know that what I do is valuable, and I know that I can provide help for agency owners. I know I can make them better, and that passion drives me. And so I offer that help to as many as I can. And if they choose not to take my help, well, then, yeah, it hurts a little bit, but it doesn't feel like rejection. It just feels like, quite frankly, it's almost like I pity them. It's almost more of like, man, if you only knew, I could really help you. But that's cool. Someday it'll come around. And oftentimes it does. So it feels less and less like rejection.
I love that perspective. Just changing that mindset, I think, of what you just said, Dominic, is even helpful for me right now. Like, those are things I have to think about. I'm the same way. I'm the most extroverted introvert, I tell people. And I'm the same way. I'd be the one, like, needing some downtime with my iPad, reading the news while I recharge, and then I can go out and talk and share. One of the questions I have for you is that, that's always been said that when you go and do the actual pitch, so let's say you are pitching and you're bringing your team with you and you're traveling and you're pitching a new client, you should bring the people who can present your product or services the best. And sometimes that's not always the most qualified in your agency. So for instance, you might have somebody who's more at a C level in your agency that just can't really articulate and pitch very well. They may be awesome at their job, but they may not be the right person for the pitch. And then, you might have this like junior graphic designer who's super passionate about your business and actually is a superstar when it comes to presenting. And you bring that person along because they're actually better at presenting and articulating your business. Do you agree with that, or do you find that like who's the right team if you're going as a team to pitch?
There's quite a bit to that question, actually. So yes, I agree that there are situations where you're honestly, I think the C level has to, especially the founders of the company, have to get less and less involved in sales if they want to scale the business. I talk about founder selling syndrome on a regular basis, where you're the only one who can do the sales. That's just because your sales process isn't good enough. You're not articulating it well enough to be able to train other people to do it. So there should be other people in your side of your organization that are able to get out there and sell. And yeah, if that's your junior graphic artist, then great. There's a gentleman by the name of Mike Arce. You guys may have heard of him. He runs a couple of big podcasts, and he has an agency devoted just to it's gyms, but it's a particular type of gyms like Orange Theories and those types of things. Anyway, one of his things I love his model is that he says everybody on my team is a salesperson. And I think that's a really great approach. Now, to put in perspective, he has 60 employees now, and they're doing about $2 million a month or $3 million a month now in sales. And they grew from like $400,000 a month 2 years ago using this approach. And I've met a lot of his sales team. He was on my show, and he travels with an entourage. So I met all these folks, and they're all amazing. So he does sales training for the entire company every single morning. It's 15 minutes long, but it's some like topic about sales training so that his junior graphic artist or his video production person or his salesperson are all getting that same training, because he said those people are out there talking about your brand all the time. And if they've got some basic sales skills, it's nothing but good for your company. And so I'd say that, yes, you're absolutely right. There are some people and things, take the team you want to win at the end of the day. Like all of this is, I know, helping people and all that good stuff, but I like winning. That is one part of me. I'm competitive. So you want to win and bring best team that you can. But the thing for you as an owner of a business is to make your entire team better and better by the day, so that it becomes, I could take any 5 team members at any given moment and they'd be awesome on the sales call. That's the ultimate goal.
That's good.
That's good. We're winding down here. And last question I have for you, Dominic, is what would you say is the one thing that people of any agency size, specifically, we all love referrals, and you referred to it. We would love to be like, I wish I would have 50 referrals this month because those are the best closing. What would you say is the one thing that any business of any size could do that could generate more referral business for them?
Treat them we are very good at following up with them on a fulfillment basis, but most companies lack on from a sales perspective. Your sales teams should have, if you're large enough to have sales teams, or if you're not, then you yourself have to do it. Is call those clients, not from a fulfillment like, hey, I just want to give you an update on your Facebook ads campaign, but call them up and say, listen, I want to talk to you about some of the things that we're offering up here, and I'd thought of you when we're rolling out this new product. We're now going to do Google AdWords. You've never done it. People neglect talking to their existing customers enough on the sales side of things. And it's interesting, one of our members just shot this video about how his father sold cars for years, like 40, 50 years, was a car salesman, and how over the last 15 years of his career, he never actually had to walk outside to talk to a customer. It was all based on his referrals, because all he did was just continue to call people. If people are on certain cycles in your business, in your niche, there's conferences coming up, look for any opportunity to just have a conversation that doesn't have to, whoops, knocked over my microphone, got so excited, doesn't have anything to do with your your fulfillment, the thing, the agency work that you're doing for them, find reasons to talk to them for sales reasons and just general relationship reasons, because you want to become invaluable, because anytime that you're not talking to them or calling them, your competitor probably is telemarketing into them. So you need to stay top of the mind from the sales perspective, because we all hate those moments when somebody goes, oh, I actually hired this other agency to do my website. You're like, I could have done your website. Oh, I thought you only did Facebook ads. What are you talking about? Well, that's on you. That's not on them. You didn't communicate it. And that sort of stuff happens all the time. So want more referrals, treat your customer base like you would your telemarketing base, stay in touch, call them all the time.
That's great. That's great. Well, Dominic, thank you for your time. How can people reach out to you if they want to do that? How do they learn more about you, hire you, et cetera?
Sure. So our website is theapexpath.com. Best way to actually get to know me and get to know what I'm about is to follow me on LinkedIn. Dominic Cummins, Dominic Cummins. I don't know if you guys are going to put a link to that, but LinkedIn is where I put everything. I put out a ton of video content. I do tips on sales all the time, different things like that. So you can get to know me there. Yeah, you can go to the website to look at joining us if you'd like, but chances are, just like we talked about, you're going to want to get to know me a little bit better, and LinkedIn's probably the best way to do that. And if you want to schedule a call just to see what's up with your agency, I love getting on calls with no obligation just to go over, see if we can't fix something in your agency. It brings me a ton of fulfillment.
That's awesome.
That's cool. Good. We'll put all those links in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, Dominic, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a successful time with your client there in Toronto, right?
Yep, in Toronto. Should be fun. Always a good time.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Dominic.
Okay.
Thanks, Dominic.
Yep. And everybody, please
you
check
so
out our
much.
Facebook group at Agency Expose Podcast. We're starting to get some new members there and starting to strike up some conversations. And if you haven't had a chance to rate and review the podcast, we would really, really appreciate you doing that. So thanks so much. Till next time, guys.
Till next time.
Thanks.